Now we have to move to the second speaker, Vanessa Piccoli, using digital tools in healthcare interactions with asylum seekers. Vanessa, sorry, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you everybody. Do you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and now can you see my presentation okay? Yes, thank you. So the study I'm going to present you today is part of a large research project that was funded by the French National Research Agency from 2016 till today. It was a project about refugee migrants and their languages in healthcare settings. So we basically studied how asylum seekers interact with people in healthcare services, both in mental and physical healthcare. It was an interdisciplinary project involving linguists, such as myself, sociologists and psychologists. All the data we recorded was filmed in the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region in France. That's the orange one you can see. And we recorded consultation, natural occurring consultation. And we also made some semi-structured interviews with both healthcare professionals and interpreters and migrants. All the work we did was then reinvested in professional training actions, both in face-to-face professional training and in a training platform that will be soon available for free, but in French. The REMILAS project is finished, but we have a new project, COM2020. We basically make studies the same thing, but with a special focus on third parties and on digital communication. My methodology of work was multimodal conversation analysis. So with this methodology, we film people as they interact in a natural environment, and then we analyze what they say, but also what they do. So it's not just verbal analysis, but we take into account also gestures, body movements, objects manipulation, and so on. In this field, in the last 10 years or so, there have been a lot of works about communication in institutional settings with migrants. And most of these works focus on the role of the interpreter. They wanted to show that the interpreter is not just a translating machine, but they do a very important work as coordinator and intercultural mediators. Some works focused also on the lay interpreters, that is not professional interpreters, friends, family members, including children sometimes, and some research focused on the cases where interpreting is made at a distance, where interpreters are not physically there, but intervene by telephone or conference call. There have been fewer researches studying how people interact in this context when there is not an interpreter, so when they only have to rely on their skills. And so basically in these cases, when the healthcare professional and the migrant do not share a language, they use what they can. So they use gestures, some words from many languages, and between the resources they can use, there are of course digital tools. So that's the topic of my presentation today. My research questions were, do asylum seekers and healthcare professionals use digital tools to understand each other? If they do, what do they use? Spoiler alert, it will be mostly in Google Translate. And how do they combine the use of digital tools with others' conversational activity in progress and with other resources for communication? To answer this question, I looked at 21 consultation. It's a part of the corpus of the REMILAS project. 21 consultation involving 4 different general practitioners in 2 different settings. In this consultation, there were no professional interpreters, but in 9 cases out of 21, there was a non-professional interpreter, either a friend or a family member, translating for the patient. To give you an idea what I saw in this data, first of all, smartphones were never used. The only digital tool was used, it was the practitioner's computer that he used to basically to use Google Translate. Google Translate was used by only one of the 4 practitioners in 3 consultations. So the person who used it frequently. And it was always the doctor's initiative to open Google Translate to use it. But when it was used for the first time, it was then used several times over the consultation. And I think it's worth mentioning that in 2 cases, there was also the recourse of Google Images. It was used once by the same doctor and once by another one to show some picture, for example, showing the image of a pillow to show what a pillow is. I will show you an excerpt of natural consultation, but before we do that, I would like to tell you some word about medical research on Google Translate, because in medical settings, they ask themselves, of course, if Google Translate was accurate enough to be used. And basically they answered no, but they're still using it. So to determine that, they made some experiences. For example, Petil and Davis in 2014, they made an experience. They selected 10 commonly used sentences in medical settings, and they translated to 26 languages with Google Translate. And then they asked some 26 native speakers to translate it back in English. And the result was that 42 of these translations were wrong. There were some very poetical translations. So for example, your husband had a cardiac arrest, became your husband's heart was imprisoned. Poetical, but not very effective. They also discovered that translation among Western languages were more reliable. Another experience was about the difference between Google Translate general translation apps and specifically conceived translation apps for medical settings. And this study showed that medical apps worked better. In general, the conclusion is that Google Translate is not accurate enough. It shouldn't be used unless it's really urgent and there is no other solution. But still, they highlight the fact that Google Translate is really convenient and inexpensive, and they still use it because hospital often encounters problem in budget and in practical reaching of practical issues in reaching an interpreter. So, keeping that in mind, we will see a case study. I will show you one excerpt, a 2-minute sequence that we will see in 3 parts. And as you will see, data are anonymized. This sequence is taken from a 2-hour consultation with an Albanian family who just arrived in France. There are 5 of them. There is mother, father, 3 children. That's the first time they see this doctor, and the doctor is trying to reconstruct their medical history. Nobody in the family speaks French, but the eldest daughter, Tina, it's not her real name, of course. Tina speaks English quite well, so she acts as an interpreter with the doctor. The first doctor is French, but can speak more or less English as well. And Google Translate in this interaction is used for the first time quite late, after 55 minutes, but once it's used for the first time, then they use it again 12 more time in the remaining hour of the interaction. So here you can see there is the doctor pointing at her neck. That's because Tina's father, that you can see on the left, explained that he had a problem with his neck, and the doctor is trying to understand what's the problem exactly. Well, sorry.
It was broken here? The vertebra? Broken.
No broken, but this prostate.
Hernie discale?
No. Vanessa Piccoli. Like the next
So here you have the transcription. The doctor asks if the vertebra was broken, and Tina and the father understands the word vertebra because it's similar in Albanian, and they understand the question. They answer no, it was not broken, and then the father begins to explain what was actually the problem. The problem was that it has moved. The vertebra has moved. But this verb spostuare in Albanian that is pronounced by the father, it causes some issues for Tina to translate. She doesn't know how to translate it, and so she kind of adapts it. She says postai in a kind of French or English way, I don't know, and she hesitates. Her father sees that she's in trouble, and so she tries to help her out, giving some reformulations. So he says they have moved, they have fallen, they have come down, but none of these reformulation are translated because in the same time the doctor takes the floor, the conversational floor. She proposes a candidate solution. She tries to guess what was the father problem. She says, in French, she says hernie discale, herniated disc. But this solution is rejected by both Tina and her father. So the father keeps giving some reformulations, but still they're not translated because at the same time, the doctor proposes to Tina, asks her if she preferred to write. So that's an offer to use Google Translation. And Tina accepts this proposition. So here she will use Google Translate.
You can do it. In Albanian.
Okay.
Spostare?
No.
Sifon?
Janë transferuar, no, janë.
Janë spostuar.
Po kështu del.
So, as you saw, preparation for using Google Translate takes a while because the doctor has to open up the Google Translate on her computer, and then she has to adapt to the physical environment. She has to move the keyboard and move something else. When everything is finally in place, she says, you can do it in Albanian, line 35. And then, Tina begins to write. While writing, she says out loud this verb, posture, the troubling verb. And once she has finished writing, the doctor asks for confirmation of the translation she's reading on the screen. Or the translation is made from Albanian to French. So here is another step where she translates in English what she's reading in French to get a confirmation. And the translation made by Google is transfer. In French is the same verb, transférer. And this translation is rejected by Tina and her father with some irony because it's clearly not a good translation. Here, it's interesting to highlight the fact that Google Translate would have led to a misunderstanding, but that was avoided by the fact that Tina recognized this word transferred as the wrong one. And that's also thanks to the fact that it's a transparent word. It's a word that is similar in English, in French, and in Albanian. So here, since this first translation wasn't good, father tries to repair. He says one more time what the problem actually was. They have moved. And then Tina will try again with Google Translate.
Okay, we can try now. Can we push?
Yes, less big.
super clear there.
Okay, it's the size of the ring is smaller. Smaller? Little?
Later.
Okay, I think I understand.
You understand? Okay.
Vanessa, sorry to interrupt. You got 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
So here, Tina prepares to write again. So she erased the first sentence and then she writes. While writing, she talks out loud. She tries a reformulation, one of the reformulations that her father suggested. So they have come down. Same time, father gives another information, and the doctor, line 61, begins to ask a question that she will repeat line 65 until line 71, because actually there is another comprehension problem that Tina doesn't seem to understand the doctor's question, that is, if the size of the ring is smaller. And we don't really have an answer to this question. Tina says little, line 72, but it's not really clear if she understood. But then line 73, the father takes the initiative to explain one more time. He does that with the resources he has. So he speaks in Albanian, but he uses his body. He draws a ring on the table, and then with his arm, he makes a movement like towards the lower part of the table. And after that, the doctor says she thinks she understands. So we don't know for sure if she actually did. We don't know what helped her mostly to understand, but in total, she kinds of understands. So to sum up what we saw in this consultation, that it was in English lingua franca with a non-professional interpreter, so it was already a complicated situation. We saw that Google Translate was used when the interpreter's skills were not sufficient, so when the interpreter wasn't able to translate. And Google Translate was one of many resources that were mobilized: the adaptation of the Albanian word, many reformulation, gestures, and body representation, and Google Translation that was used twice. So in this sequence, but also in the other cases that I analyzed in this research, Google Translate clearly slows down the consultation, and that's also because the physical environment is not conceived to be used for Google Translate to be used, because they have to move the computer, it's really not comfortable, and so on. And Google Translate can lead to misunderstandings. You see in the case of the verb transfer, and of course it's not sufficient to assure intercomprehension, but still it contributes to intercomprehension because it's one among many resources that make sense together in a kind of a gestalt, a kind of a null that makes sense. And I think that's that's how this kind of conversational research can really improve medical experiences, because medical experiences try out Google Translate, but it's kind of a hypothetical situation where there are no actual interactions between people. Instead, the reality of the use of Google Translate is this one, where people actually are there, and so they make gestures and they do other things. So for the future, I have some perspective, and there are lots of open questions. So I would like to understand, what do participants search on Google Translate? So for example, do they search for the name of the illnesses? Do they search some words to describe their symptoms, or what else? And what kind of researches are the more problematic? So for example, I have a case where they search to translate an idiomatic expression, and as you can guess, it doesn't end well. It really doesn't work. There are other cases where they translate medical terms. So medical terms are accurately translated by Google Translate, but often it's kind of useless because the patient doesn't know the term. And I also would like to answer healthcare professional, why don't they use medical translation apps, since there are a lot that exist. This one, TraducMec, is one that is developed in France, but nobody uses it in my data, so I would like to ask them why. To do that, I would need to make some interviews specifically on this matter, and I would also like to make some more recordings, and specifically recordings that gives me visual access to the screen. That's not the case in this data because they were not conceived for this line of research. And all of that will allow me to develop some training contents for healthcare professionals, because since healthcare professionals use Google Translate in reality, so the better thing we can do is to help them to use it well and to avoid all the misunderstandings that can go with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for such a clear presentation. Very, very engaging, and also, you know, I think there are several questions pending. There's a question by Joel. If you open the Q&A, why didn't they use mobile phones? This is something that you said at the very beginning of your presentation. Yeah.
I don't know why. They just don't, and that's interesting because in sociolinguistic sociology, last 10 years, everybody's speaking about the connected migrant, the fact that migrants really are very skilled users of smartphones, and so everybody's developing apps for migrants to help them out. But I don't know if it's because of the institutional setting or if they just don't choose it. But there are studies that show that migrants are skilled in using internet, but still they suffer from a digital divide because, for example, they do not have Wi-Fi and they have a limited connection. So, for example, probably they have smartphones, but they don't have data to use them. Also, I think there is the institutional place that can be kind of frightening. And so I don't know if they don't dare to take an initiative. That's always the doctor who begins to do something.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. There's another question for you from Esther. Have you shared your study with developers of the new CEFR companion volume? Do you know that? Can you read that question, Vanessa? Yeah.
I did not share with the developers of the new CEFR, but sure, why not? Yeah, good idea. I think it's not just my study, but all the work we did in the project, in this REMILAS project, we really worked a lot about mediation, both with professional and non-professional interpreters. So yeah, it's a good idea.
Vanessa, I got a question for you, if you don't mind. Having discussed with Translators Without Borders, they work a lot in healthcare, you know, across Africa and Asia, and they say that there's a problem of course, translation. Also, Tony Capstick knows that because we had that kind of conversation a couple of years ago. They say that one problem is the translations, translating into several languages, but another problem is a cultural problem, i.e. assessing symptoms in different ways across different cultures. Have you ever found this reason for miscommunication? It's not just the real term, the real expression, the idiomatic expression, but it's also the different way of assessing symptoms that could generate that kind of miscommunication. And then maybe it's even more difficult than to adjust, you know, the conversation, the communication.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there are several studies about that, and there especially I think in the studies about the asylum request. So I think, for example, the works of Marco Jacquemet,
Yep.
and of course that's very present in my methodology. So we work on the micro level. So we will see this kind of phenomenon, but like in looking at one word or one gesture, we kind of reveal the macro category and the macro issues that are concerned. But yeah, it happens all the time, and that's one of the aspects that are really highlighted in the studies about the work of the interpreter, because the interpreter does a lot of contextualization exactly to address this kind of issues.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. We have two questions that are very interesting, in my opinion. Margot asks you, did you register different strategies patients or doctors used when they realized the machine translation was incorrect? So do they work together, patient and doctors, in order to correct or amend the, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, they use other strategies. For example, that's one case where Google Translation really doesn't work. Then they use Google Images. So they look for an image that's quite effective. In other case, they just use other formulations, other languages, but in many cases, at the end of the day, you cannot be really sure, and I think participants are neither if they actually understood or not. That's kind of a flu zone that stays there, and you're not really sure. In some cases, I guess I also have kind of proofs that there is a misunderstanding. So for example, in the same consultation, there's a moment where the doctor answer is if the brother of Tina had a vaccinated, sorry, for a specific illness, and they looks for the name of the illness on Google Translate, so they understand the illness, but they answer, no, we didn't have this illness, but they don't answer to the question if he was vaccinated. So actually they do not reach an intercomprehension, the opposite.
Thank you very much. Joel is asking you about consent. Yeah. If you can expand that.
Kind of long procedure. So we had that first field work, and we talked with the institution, and then with the doctors, and then the doctors talked with the patients, and every patient had to sign a paper that was translated in several languages. So we have a long procedure. After that, we could still debate if patients are kind of feel obliged to accept or not. That's an ethical issue that stays. But
thank you very much, Vanessa. Vanessa and Susan has got a question for you. Susan, I think you can open your mic. Maybe it's easier for you to interact with Vanessa directly.
Okay.
Want to ask her.
Thank you. I'm really loving your presentation, Vanessa. It's fascinating. One of my questions is, did you see any examples of doctors and patients using pictures or diagrams in order to communicate? You know, they're talking about in the video clip that you showed us, they're talking about disc problems, you know, and at the very end, like the father makes this reference to rings, you know, but it just hit me, like, you know, often in doctors' offices, there are on the wall these big diagrams and what have you. So can you say anything about the use or lack of use of images in the process?
Not really so much. That's some cases with Google Images, but and we have a lot of embodied representation. So as we saw with the father that uses his body, but usually they don't have a pen. I don't know, but they don't really draw. They simulate drawing, and there are not really resources. But that's interesting, your question, because one of the idea that was explored in all these apps that were conceived for migrants, it's exactly that. So there are apps that are based on pictograms, but my data they don't use it. No.
Thank you very much, Vanessa.